Welcome to the Technical Workflows that Improve the End User Experience presentation. My name is Clinton Fattal, and with me I have
Tim Knox. I am the senior consulting engineer at Jamf that is focused on all things industry. Essentially, what that means is that if you have an iPad or an iPhone or even an Apple TV and you're in a market like retail in this example, or healthcare or manufacturing, you'll find me there trying to figure out those little gaps where the MDM may not do exactly everything you want to do for your workflow and how me and my team can help maybe make that work a little better. Or in the case of this session, one of our happy customers built something that that will help them out. So can you tell me a little more about Publix and what it is you do at Publix, please?
Sure. Publix is one of the largest supermarkets in the United States, based out of Lakeland, Florida. We operate mostly in the Southeast, with stores as far west as Tennessee and as far north as Virginia. Now, I'm the manager slash lead and one of the lead engineers, and we handle mostly retail, but also operate and manage devices in the corporate and distribution areas, with most of our iOS devices being in pharmacy and Instacart. And the Apple footprint at Publix has grown quite a bit over the past few years, and with that has brought new device types. A question I'm sure many Jamf admins have had is, how do we implement a solution like Jamf Setup, but with more flexibility? In the past, we've tried to use Jamf Setup and Reset, and it works, but it has its limitations on what information can be sent over to Jamf. So what did we do about that? Well, we made our own app. And last year, Jared Rainey presented Improving Internal Customer Service Within Retail, where he introduced our Publix Enroll app. So I'm going to show a video of this. The first option is to select whether or not the device is corporate or retail. And then based on that response, we'll have a few options for device type. A screen for inputting the asset tag, and another for the building and store. And then finally, there's a screen to verify all the information submitted with a submit button that sends it off to Jamf. So that's great. We have this app, it works, but how can we make it better? Right now we have 34 pre-stages, and that's just way too many. With the previous version of the app, using pre-stage enrollments as smart group criteria locked us in to how we could set it up and how those devices were used. We thought of using Active Directory information, but found that some of that information was unreliable. We also wanted a uniform experience that could be used for all mobile device types, and as well as making it intuitive enough for anybody to use. So the information that we needed to collect, we needed to know whether or not it was going to be a corporate or retail device, what department it was going to be in, the asset tag number, the building, the division, whether or not it was using a real or non-human account, as well as other extension attributes that we might want to add. So what were our options? We realized that the best way, the extension attributes would allow us to simplify the setup and provide flexibility for future expansion. And Jamf Setup did fit the description, but it didn't solve for the data input for building or asset tag.
Yeah, that is a limitation with Jamf Setup. Being given a choice, an array of selections that you can select to populate a single extension attribute can be incredibly useful for things like assigning a role, something you can learn more about in my other session, Getting Started with Single Login, the interactive lab. Come on over and learn how to do it on your own hardware with our own virtual environment. But it doesn't allow for things like nested selections in if that statement, if this, then that statements, or a even just a simple empty inventory field that a user can type information in without being provided a list. So something like this is needed in order for you to get all that information from a device. Now, obviously, there's ways you can do that in Jamf, like the inventory preloads if you want to populate all that information on a spreadsheet and upload it and just trust that as a source of truth. But that lacks some of the flexibility something like this would have, where you could grab any device from any location and maybe even turn it into whatever might be needed with whatever information you need to put it, so that IT knows where that device is, what that device is being used for, and can have a really great audit history of all of those interactions. So what you built last year and what you showed last year, definitely cool. I am looking forward to the rest of the session where we can see how you've made further improvements. But yeah, that is definitely a limitation with Jamf Setup.
Right. So our solution, we decided to build our own app again. We
Why not?
needed to learn a lot of Swift. We wanted to make sure that this was going to be a native app this time, and we wanted to create one pre-stage to rule them all. We needed to create a device type extension attribute, and if we've got some time, let's make it look prettier.
Sure.
The first iteration was a bit of a rough draft, so it looks a little rough around the edges, but it got the job done. So hopefully we can make it look nicer. So what do we need to accomplish this? Well, we're definitely going to need some development skills. We're going to need API access, reduced pre-stage enrollments, extension attributes, and smart groups. How do we do it? Well, for the development skills, like I said, we had to learn Swift. And then we realized it was much harder than we thought. So we got help from a real developer, and we tried to learn as much from him as we could, because our end goal was to own this app. Our team wanted to own this app and maintain it so that the next time we needed to make any changes, we could implement it much more quickly. The best, we'll also need API access. Best practice is to use a single purpose Jamf account with least privileged access. We also knew that basic authentication was going away, so we wanted to fix that from our old app.
Yeah, so how exactly did you get API access for the app? Because obviously you need that app itself to be able to make a change through the API to affect what's in Jamf Pro in those inventory fields. We don't allow that to happen by default. You need some user, some privileged account in order to make that happen. So how does that app understand how to navigate that API connection? What did you do to solve that problem?
Yeah, so we started by creating a standard Jamf account, and giving it again the least privileged access, and then we realized that least privileged access wasn't correct, so we had to make tweaks. There was a few iterations of that. Yeah, it took some time, but once we had that, the developer took those credentials and converted them to base 64, and from there the app generates a bearer token for the API calls. So,
And did you bake that into the app itself so that you could avoid storing it in managed app config, for example? Like what we did with the original version of Jamf Setup was to essentially bake a username and password in, and or no, we actually had that in managed app config. We had it in plain text in managed app config, which would then deliver it basically in clear text to Jamf for the authentication piece. Did you do that in managed app config, or is it baked into your app itself?
Yeah, basically we had to do the baked-in credentials, and that's a little bit of a flaw. If security comes down or you get some audit and you've got to change the password, now we have to go back in and open up the app and redeploy it. So it's not perfect, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, it does, and that's great. Yeah. And OAuth would be something that would be useful. Something that Jamf doesn't currently permit is for third parties to be able to utilize OAuth as a way of authenticating into Jamf Pro. But Um, I don't know. Maybe everybody out there who wants OAuth, put in a feature request. We'll see what we can do.
Let's do it. It sounds good. So back to our pre-stage enrollments. As we discussed, 34 is too many. I'm sure there are many other organizations that have way more than 34. I've heard some people talk
Yeah.
about them. Um, but for us, we wanted less. But we also realized that one was not enough. With only one pre-stage enrollment, you couldn't prevent retail from choosing a less restrictive device type, like one of the
Hmm.
ones that we would have for corporate. Um, but also having only two pre-stage enrollments, it didn't allow for adding anything new. So the pre-stage enrollments, they have specific criteria and information and settings that can be used, such as shared iPads. So that's something that we had to open up and account for. So to solve for that, we created a naming convention and just basically had a corporate or retail tag at the beginning of the pre-stage, and the app just used logic to look at those.
So you mentioned shared iPads. Sorry for making you interrupting here, but it's something that I talk a lot about in my session, getting started with single login. The interactive lab, please come on by. But shared iPad for business is something you're experimenting with at least a little bit, maybe at the beginnings in your
Yeah,
environment.
we're starting to dip our toe into it and see where it fits and where it makes the most sense. So it's
Hmm.
relatively new, but we're working on it.
Nice. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So our extension attributes, we know we needed two extension attributes so that we were only displaying relevant device types to retail and corporate. Because of the limited information available to the app about the device, that's where we talked about the API call.
Mhm.
There will be an API call using the device name, and like I said, there's limited information that you can get initially. So once we make that call, we're able to get more information, like the pre-stage that it's in. And once we have the pre-stage, we just have logic to display only the device types that we want, as well as only the buildings that we want. Now, for us, it's a little bit easier. Our retail buildings are only store numbers, so that makes that logic pretty quick and easy. Now, for smart groups, this was something that was kind of a complete overhaul. We had to do a lot of work. Uh, Again, any Jamf admins that have been working out there, they've got a Jamf instance set up for a few years. You're going to collect some old artifacts and some junk. Uh, so we wanted to use this to kind of clean things up, get better organization, and just make it better all around. We thought about using new smart groups, but we wanted to make sure that we are using existing ones to help with the transition of using the old app versus the new. We didn't want to cut over, and a lot of devices have to re-enroll. Um, and then also we wanted to, again, make this as organized as possible. So we did separate configuration profiles for each device type. So here's an example of the smart group transitional criteria. At the top, if you can see it, is a pre-stage enrollment criteria, and then we just added an OR statement for that new device type that we were using. And these are our device types.
Are all
Sorry.
of those different categories that you have built in?
Yeah. So it was a lot of work, but we discussed a naming convention that we wanted to create, and each device type is laid out. We used categories to kind of break it down, and we created new configuration profiles and sometimes duplicate configuration profiles for each device type. And again, that's
Hmm.
kind of a lot of extra work, but this makes it so that anybody coming in behind us can just at a glance look at that device type and pretty much see what it's doing. You leave
Well,
out
it
things like,
warms this old admin's heart to see categories and that kind of organizational thing. It makes me, just fills me with joy whenever I see something like that organized in that way.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was a lot of work, so glad somebody
I
appreciates
know.
it. Yeah, there's a few things like apps, of course, that you're not going to be able to see at a glance, but again, this really helps organize. So, congratulations. We have a solution, but how do you make people use it? Well, you can A, assert your dominance, B, restrict everything but the enrollment app, C, provide a nice wallpaper with written instructions that won't get read, or D, all the above. Um, so, to reduce any confusion on what needed to be done after Setup Assistant, we apply a configuration profile to hide everything except for the enrollment app. This just kind of makes it clear that you're not going to be able to do anything without running that enrollment app. And hopefully some people will stumble upon it. But for those who might not, or maybe they're a little less technical, that's where the wallpaper came in to kind of give them some direction on what to click on and where to start. It was kind of a ransom note. Basically, it says, you can receive all your apps when you finish running the enrollment app. So, but I mean, that said, we try to make this as intuitive as possible, but we still get tickets and calls about, their device is not working and all they need to do is just run the Publix Enroll app. Mm-hmm. So what does the app look like now? This is going to be the retail workflow. There's going to be no more option for selecting corporate or retail because we have the logic in the app. Takes away another step for the user for them having to select something. And the initial loading screen is what's doing the API call to figure out what pre-stage it's in. And then once it pulls that information, it displays a screen to select the division. And then next, there's drop downs for the device type, a field for the asset tag, and the building number. Finally, there's a verification page to validate all the data entered with a submit button that sends it off to Jamf. And please disregard that progress bar. It's a feature.
Hey.
So
now,
the corporate.
I gotta
Go
ask,
ahead.
did I see a little scan code dialogue in there?
It's a good eye. It's a small little hyperlink. It is something that we added. It's a nice to have, but you press that, dialog box will come up to allow the use of the camera, and once they allow, the camera will come up, allowing them to scan the asset tag, provided that it's not already attached to the device. So again, it's a nice to have, but not anything necessary. But so that was, yeah, thanks. That was the retail workflow. The corporate workflow is similar, but it just has a drop down instead of inputting the store number.
And then all those values get written directly to Jamf.
Correct. The Jamf object.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll open it up to questions.
Which is mostly me, I think. I did ask a bunch of them as I went through. The OAuth question I think is important to ask, and I'm glad that you answered it as clearly as you did. I like that little scan code button thing. I know that's a small thing, but anytime I don't have to trust a human being to do a thing, I would rather not trust a human being to do a thing. I'd much rather have a piece of technology that can scan it and then do that transaction without requiring a human. Yeah, because while they are important for us to have a job, I would be much happier if we could just remove humans completely from the equation and just let our technologies run without need for any human intervention at all. Which actually may be what I'm like. This solution is something that we've run across a lot specifically in the retail space. The retail business development team and myself at Jamf talk to customers similar to yours all the time. And one of the biggest questions they ask is the how do we identify what store a device is in? It's just one of the very, very common refrains that happen pretty
Right.
constantly. And this solves that. And it solves it, I think, in a pretty elegant way, very clear, very easy. But is there anything that you can think of, and I love putting you on the spot like this, in version 2 of this, or maybe I guess it would be 2.5 if V1 was the one that Jared showed last year and V2 is the one that you have there? Is there something that you're hoping you can iterate on, or something that maybe the ping-ponging progress bar, maybe we can iterate on that?
Yeah, yeah. That's planned to be fixed soon. But as far as new features, we've thought about new ideas for apps. I don't know if there's really anything that we want to add to this app specifically. Now we've had the idea of maybe making it a universal app that could be
Hmm.
used with Apple Silicon Macs. That would be kind of cool. And do some device setup that way. But that would be kind of another iteration. And again, there may be some things in the future that we add, but right now we just kind of want to make it as simple as we can for those users. That said, last year we had I think Jared Rainey touched on it a bit, the device locator app, which is an app that looks at the building
Hmm.
the device is in. And if there are multiple devices with that same building, it will show you a list of them. And if you're missing one of those at a store, you can tap that device, and it will send an API call to enable loss mode. And it'll also send them the location of the device, giving them a map. So if it's still in the store, it's maybe just by a baler, hopefully not in it. Um, they can go grab it and turn off loss mode in the same app. Um, we've had a need for we'd really love for there to be an option for Jamf Recon, but for iOS devices. So we're
Right.
thinking of maybe adding like a troubleshooting, converting the existing loss mode app into like maybe a troubleshooting app that can be deployed, and with that having a recon option to do an inventory update, because that not having users not having the ability to perform a recon, which we have one set up in our self-service for Macs, and we use that all the time. So that would be really cool to add, and maybe some new things as well. But
I love it.
yeah,
Well, I love seeing the innovation. I love seeing what people actually do to create solutions on their own when they're, people like you that have to take care of so many devices in so many different locations. It's tricky. So I love seeing the innovation. I love you being open talking about this. I really want to thank you and Publix for having this little chat. And hopefully we can have you back again next year and we can see how far you've taken it. So thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Please enjoy the rest of JNUC.